Hi guys, it's really nice to have such an international audience with us today. And hello to Sophie and Gillian as well.
Hello.
Hi.
Cool, so okay, we'll get started then. So I'm Hannah from AnswerThePublic. Thanks once again for being here today. It's great to have you all here. So just a quick reminder before we get started for the people that haven't been on one of our webinars before of what it's all about. So each month we talk to industry experts from all sorts of different backgrounds. It might be content or PR, perhaps creative. And obviously today we'll be talking to Gillian and Sophie, which is going to be about search and social. And really we explore how you can read people's minds and make better business decisions. So it's just worth pointing out at this stage that we will be talking about some kind of tools and methods that you can use to get the most out of your insight. But this isn't an AnswerThePublic tutorial. If that's what you're looking for, we have got one over on our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/AnswerThePublic, and we will put that in the chat so you've all got that. We also have got a tutorial video as well about how to use AnswerThePublic on our YouTube channel. And also for anyone that's been on our last webinars, there could be a few sort of points that we may repeat just to help people that are new to search listening and new stuff, obviously, about social intelligence this time. But there's lots of, very new stuff for you guys to benefit from too. So who are we talking to today? So we're really, really super excited today to have Gillian Ney with us. Hi, Gillian.
Hello. Hi, everyone.
It's really, really great to have you. And we've been talking to Gillian quite a bit lately, actually. And this is, I should say, too, a rescheduled version of this webinar. So we were going to do it probably about 6 weeks ago, but both Gillian and Sophie, poor them, were both poorly. So it's great to have you guys back at full health again today. So Gillian is the UK's first ever Doctor of Social Media, which is very cool. And she's also a digital behavioural scientist. She's really an expert in everything to do with social intelligence, and that's what she will be talking about today. And we've also got Sophie Coley, and Sophie is our regular guest on our webinars. So it's really nice to have you back again, Sophie. So Sophie is a thinker, teacher, author, and speaker on all things to do with search listening. And Sophie's also the director of strategy at the agency PropellerNet. So today's conversation is all about how merging search and social data unlocks what people really think. So first, before we get started, it would be really great if Sophie and Gillian, if you could give us a bit of a background into how you got into social intelligence and search listening. So hi, Gillian. Yeah, perhaps you could do that first.
Yeah, I'll give you the Cliff Notes version because it's pretty long, but and it was a complete accident that I fell into social intelligence. It was in 2000, I think it was 2006, or it might have just been the start of 2007. I was finishing off my undergraduate degree at university, and I was offered a small job from the university department that I was in, and it was to analyse volunteer voice for mega sporting events. So back at that time, Glasgow had just won the Commonwealth Games bid, and they wanted to understand more about the volunteer experience, because what we didn't understand at the time was that each host city gets to define how they recruit and train and use the volunteers. So that's why there's always a bit of a variance in that experience in all of these different large games. So I was given the tiniest budget you could imagine and told that I had to go and find people and understand their experience. So the only way I could do it was through online forums and blogs and the social media that was about at the time. Hate social media, love the data. And it kind of grew from there. And I then ended up going on and doing a PhD in that area. And it's honestly just been my life ever since then. And it's great because I was in it at the start, and it's great to see how the industry has evolved and how our processes have started coming about, and just the technologies and what supports there and how it's being used in organisations now is fantastic.
Lovely, really interesting, thank you. And Sophie, if you could perhaps give some background on how you sort of started originating search listening? That'd be really interesting as well.
Sure. So I guess really interesting to hear that Gillian sort of sees it as an accident. I actually feel the same about where I've ended up. So we're all here by accident. But I did journalism at university, and I think I often tell clients and people I speak to that my kind of key trait is just nosiness about people. And when I left university, I had an internship at PropellerNet, which is the agency that I'm still at many, many years later. And I actually started in PR, mostly because actually when I was at university, our journalism lecturers spent the whole 3 years telling us that if we wanted to have a life and make decent money, then we'd be better off in PR than journalism. So when I left, I took the opportunity to try an internship in PR at least, to see which side of the fence I liked better, I suppose. And it was digital PR specifically that I started at PropellerNet doing. And so I've been working at PropellerNet in digital for about 11 years now. But I think that, like I say, the nosy person in me quite early on started realising that so PropellerNet, for anyone who doesn't know, is predominantly a search marketing agency, but even search marketing, I would say, is quite a broad discipline these days. But started to get really curious about what we could learn about people from how they search. I think it's one thing focusing on SEO and the traditional side of search and optimizing things so that people can find your website better. But actually, and anyone who's been on one of these webinars before will have heard me say it, people tell Google things that they don't tell their partner, their best friend, their doctor even. And it's fascinating. And I love nothing more than spending a day uncovering curious searches on Google, because you can learn all sorts of things. So I suppose, I started using what I now call search listening as just a technique for researching audiences in the work I was doing, because it was free and quick and quite easy to do. And actually, I felt like it was giving me really telling data. I wasn't sort of doing surveys or focus groups, which obviously have value and a place in the kind of marketing research mix. But the fact that it's observed has always stood out to me. So just a tactic that I started doing, and now I'm really, really passionate about getting more people involved. And just I think it's a thing that the search marketing industry has taken off, the social listening industry has taken off, but I'm really curious to kind of find a middle ground between the two, and get more people doing what I call search listening, because I think it's incredibly powerful.
Brilliant, thank you. We've had loads more people joining while you guys have been introing yourselves. So thank you to everyone else that just joined the room. So just a few pointers before we get started. We would really love it if you guys got involved in any conversations on Twitter. So I'll just pause on this slide for a second, but you can @ any of us. So Gillian is at the SI Lab. So that's the Social Intelligence Lab. And she's also at Dr. Gillian Ney. I'm at Hannah M. Foster, and obviously we are Answer the Public, so we're at Answer the Public as well. And you can get Sophie, she is at Coley Bird or at Search Listening. And we've also got a hashtag today as well if you want to get involved in the conversation that way. So that one is hashtag Search Listening. So just two very, very simple house rules before we get into the conversation. So please do ask questions. We've got Gary, who is the founder of Answer the Public. He is behind the scenes today. So he's hidden, but he will be looking at your questions. If there's anything that we can answer during the conversation, we will try and do that. If not, we'll hold them to the Q&A section at the end. And as I said, please do share stuff on Twitter. That would be great. Cool. So first of all, then, to get started, Gillian and Sophie, it'd be great if you guys could give us an overview of how you define social listening or social intelligence and search listening. And also, I think particularly for Gillian as well, it'd be really interesting to hear what journey that social intelligence has been on. I'm sure, lots of people talk about sort of social listening, but obviously you talk about social intelligence. So it'd be really great to hear about that journey and how it's kind of got to that.
Yeah, no, brilliant. And I know that Sophie agrees with some of this in terms of how search listening is coming about and how that's evolving as well. I still think that both are very misunderstood fields, and we tend to apply a lot of labels to this, and it's a maturing industry, and as the industry matures, everybody wants to adopt the new label, but they're maybe not the processes and the rigor has maybe not increased from where they've been before, so they're kind of stuck, and things can get a bit of a bad reputation. I think everyone on the call has probably heard of social analytics or social listening before, and I'd imagine that everybody has had some experience or has a perception of it, and probably most of it is not very good. As an industry, we kind of started out when social media became about, and it became more about the brand and what everybody had to listen to what was being said about the brand when they're not in the room, and that's how it was sold. Or it was sold on the other side, which was more about the marketing metrics, and you had to analyze your social media engagement. So they're they're more tactical things to do with the data. Whereas if we revert back to what I said, how I started, I was answering a specific question. So I think pretty much I've always been in that intelligence camp because we've been using it for market research purposes. So the industry's kind of moved and changed a little bit. So there was all the analytics, there was brand monitoring, it came into the social listening where we maybe were trying to answer some questions, but there was a lot of share of voice and sentiment and things like that. And it doesn't always relate back to business questions. And I think that a lot of people found it really difficult to get traction and buy-in in their organizations with this. My definition of social intelligence is more around the strategic use of data, which may be social data. We also blend search data and other data sources in there. So it's about being pragmatic with that data and using the best data to answer the question. It's not just all stuck on search or social. There's transactional data may come into it. There may be, even things like weather data and things like that. It can get a little bit crazy. But it's more about the strategic use to answer a specific business question. And I think that as the industry's matured, we've began now to be able to communicate the value of social intelligence across the organization by understanding the types of outcome that it can have an impact on. So a few weeks ago, we were working with Listen and Learn Research, which is one of the Social Intelligence Lab's members, and we brought out a new model. So there was six different, I always forget the sixth one as well, sorry. There were 6 different areas in which we feel that social intelligence can have an impact and an outcome in the organisation, which is over strategy, purpose, innovation, communication, being able to improve, appeal, and manage. So it's quite diverse, and it suffers from a bit of all things to all people. But the easiest way is, are you strategically using the data to answer a business question? That was a very long-winded response. I do apologise.
It's really useful though, and for me, so as Hannah said earlier on, I guess we've been talking for a couple of months now in the lead up to this, given Ben toothache and other things, and it's been fascinating for me to talk to Gillian more as well, because I think part of the reason I started trying to push search listening as a research method a little bit more was probably because I fell into that camp of exactly what you've just said in terms of thinking about social listening as a very tactical kind of limited method, really. And it's not to say I'm anti-social listening at all. Like, I think sometimes it's the right thing to do, but it very much comes back to what Gillian just said, that actually it should be the right method, if you like, and the right data source for the right output that you're trying to get to and the right business question that you're trying to answer. So it's been interesting for me to kind of actually broaden how I see it all, I suppose, and actually I've always been super passionate about, like, well, you know, my role at the agency is director of strategy now, and thinking strategically over tactically is one of my biggest things that I think everyone should be doing, obviously. And actually, it's interesting to reflect on myself, how I've probably looked at social. I think I've probably viewed it as quite a tactical channel, but as Gillian said, I think merging all of the kind of data sets and bringing it back to that intelligence piece rather than just listening. It's a really, it framed things in a much clearer way for me. So I was really grateful for those conversations with Gillian in the lead up to this.
Cool, great. And yeah, Sophie, actually, it might be just good while we're on this point, because there might be people in the room that perhaps haven't heard of search listening before either. So how would you kind of describe search listening sort of in a nutshell?
Sure. So I have a handy slide. Here is my handy slide. So at its purest, search listening is the monitoring of Google searches and Google data for thoughts and searches around brands, keywords, topics, competitors or industries, and then the analysis to gain insights and act on those opportunities. So you might hear someone say, I mean, I hope you hear more and more people say, we need to understand our customers better, let's do some search listening. And then the second point, which I think reflects a little better on the conversation that we were just having, which is that it's an underutilized method for gaining consumer insight, which can complement other more established research methods. So I guess whenever I talk about search listening, I'm really keen to make sure that, I'm not saying it's the only thing people should be doing. Again, it goes back to exactly what Gillian just said, which is that figure out what you're trying to figure out and then think about what method you want to do. But I do believe that search listening is a method that is underutilized at the moment, and more people should be doing it. And that, like I say, that we can learn so much about people from Google. And while the search industry has figured out a way to make use of that data really well, I think, again, going back to what Gillian said, if you're thinking about business problems, a lot of them can be answered to some extent with search data.
Definitely, I'd agree there. And I think that in my own work, so I've taken a slight step back from analysing social data now, because my company, we're the central meeting point for the social intelligence industry, and we help make connections between those people, because it's something that didn't happen before. But when I analyse social data, I always started with search. And in particular, when AnswerThePublic came about, I started using AnswerThePublic to be able to understand how people were speaking. Because when you're typing in that query and there's that blink flashing and you've got a blank page, you're just trying to think of words, and you're just putting all these words on this piece of paper, on the screen. I'm an old school. I've still got pen and paper here on my desk. When you're sitting thinking about what that query should be, your mind goes blank and you just start firing words in, and sometimes they don't make sense. Whereas if you start from search, you can begin to understand how people are searching for things and how people are talking from things. And then you can begin to build that much more refined search query, which is going to make all the rest of your work a lot simpler, and you're going to get more value from it a lot quicker as well.
Yeah, I always find, especially, I guess, if you're, I mean, there may be people in here who work in agencies or for brands, but either way, I think when you're particularly immersed in an industry, you get used to the jargon and the brand terms that you use and all that sort of thing. And again, I think search can just give you that nudge sometimes and remind you, even down to spelling, you know. I think I've worked with a beauty client previously that spelt smoky eye a certain way, you know, IE rather than EI. And actually with search data, we were able to show them that more people spelt it the other way, and perhaps that's what they might like to use to reflect the more popular spelling amongst their audience. But again, to get to those really strong queries that are going to give you the best insights in your broader sort of social intelligence work, then yeah, search can be really, really useful for that.
Definitely, thank you. Yeah, it's really interesting what you were saying, Gillian, about, you know, when you're doing social listening, that you're actually starting with the search. So you just kind of do that naturally without actually sort of thinking about merging the two together. But my next question sort of ties into that, because they are obviously completely different data sets. But I think from what you guys have been saying so far, you kind of agree that they do complement each other and do help us to get a more 360 degree of someone's behaviour. So, yeah, what you know, could you sort of elaborate a bit more on that and how they can be blended to kind of get a true understanding of people?
Yeah, sure. So like I said, in when I started doing this, I always used search to help refine what the language was going to be that I was going to use in my own query for when I was doing the social intelligence, social listening part of it. I work with a number of other agencies and individuals and different vendors as well. And what we're finding is that search data is probably the biggest complementary data source to social listening now. And we're finding that there's many, many projects that combine the both of them. So if you think about it, it's trying to understand people's behaviour And I think that's what everyone seems to be focusing in on. So I've got a couple of examples here. They're not my work, so I've had to write them down on notes on my handy piece of paper. Like I said, I'm an analog girl who works in the digital realm. So we've got one of the agencies that we work with, and they do something really interesting with the data. So this is from Listen and Learn Research, and they use it to find the path to purchase. So they would start by understanding how people are searching, and then they would go and they would run those searches on, for instance, Google, to figure out then what pages were coming up, so they could see what actually is being searched for and what's coming up, what people are clicking on, and then understand what's actually being said and within those different websites. So it could be forums, it could even be Twitter, or it could be a website that's coming up, or a review site, or anything like that. And they would analyze all of that information to come back to say, this is what the internet says about your brand, and this is the path to purchase for people. Here's what's being said, here's the perception of you. So there's a really nice, clear story in that, and understanding what that path to purchase looks like. We've got other ways of being able to use it. So Ipsos did a really fantastic study during COVID, and they wanted to understand how the public in the UK felt about financial vulnerability. So they used Answer the Public. I don't know if you know this. They know.
I love hearing stuff like this. It's amazing.
So they used Answer the Public to understand a bit more about what financial vulnerability and how the general UK public felt about it. So it's what they found. So they were looking for, just let me get this up here. Yeah. So they were understanding how do people at home feel about their finances. So they took mortgages as the first instance of having a look at this, to see how people felt. So that was at the start of COVID they did this. So the mortgage holidays and things like that were starting to come through for the UK consumer. So they used Answer the Public to understand how people felt about the vulnerability. And the analysis threw up 4 key things. And there was a bit, you could see it, there was vulnerability there. That there was concern over the end date for when these mortgage holidays were going to finish, and if they were going to continue or not. There was people who were weighing up alternative options. So should they take a mortgage holiday, or should they take an interest-only holiday, or pay interest only? And then there was general seeking of information to understand how that payment holiday works. And then there was people considering the longer-term impact on their own finances. So, for instance, would that affect their credit rating? And they did all of this just using Answer the Public, and could then categorize how the public were feeling in these different behaviours and what it was that they were searching for, which I think it's an amazing study. Mm-hmm. Again, there's other things. One of the other agencies that we work with is Convosphere, and they use search a lot in combination with social intelligence as well. And it's to help understand what topics of information people search for and their key information needs. So they do a lot of customer journey and to understand patient journeys and things like that. So if you've got a rare disease, or if you've been diagnosed with something, and what that search looks like, kind of what information it is that you're looking for, to help their clients be able to build out better content and things like that as well. So it's pretty varied, but it's all about understanding people.
Yeah, and for me, I think it comes back to this sometimes. So I think the question's almost leading in some ways, that we're talking about combining search and social data. And for me, I guess anyone who works in any job that involves trying to understand people, I think the message for me would be focus on who and what and why, and not where. So it goes back to exactly the first point that we made with this, which is what's your business problem? What are you trying to understand? And therefore, what can you learn about people? And I don't think the starting point is, right, let's jump into Twitter or let's jump into Facebook. It may provide some interesting insights, the context of the behavior that's happening in that channel, but it shouldn't ever be the starting point. And I think I have another slide here, just some different things that I like to think about, I guess, when I'm trying to understand people. And what's really interesting for me, and again, if anyone's been on any of these webinars previously, you'll have seen some of the side-by-side comparisons that I do. So, I guess I always try and flip it back to people and say, when we work in marketing or any sort of business, we're not an alien species, right? We're humans, and we do all these things too. I'm on social media all the time, and I'm in Google all the time. I'm not a different person in those two channels. I still have the same issues affecting me in my life, and I still need or want to interact with businesses. But I will do different things on different channels. And so things we've explored. Finances is a really interesting topic, and really, really interesting to hear about that study that you were just talking about around mortgages. But so looking at social or behavior on social media around finances, I've seen things previously about people almost sharing memes and making light of financial situations. It's just one behavior, right, on social media, but I've seen people sharing memes about, I think the one I share is a guy who, he was making a joke about the fact that he was about to deposit a load of money into his online gambling account, and he was already severely overdrawn, and his bank wouldn't like what he was doing, but sharing that on social media. And on the flip side, if you go into social search data and look at how people might be searching in that instance, you start to see all the kind of worries. And the more, I guess, if you're in search, you're looking for immediate help potentially, rather than just kind of trying to broadcast something. So in search data, you'd see, how can I get out of my overdraft? Or, people tell Google things. So things like, I'm worried that I'm in my overdraft, which always fascinates me, that behavior that people will type a statement and not a question into search. I think the point there is, we can't anticipate how people are going to behave all the time. So actually, yeah, again, I'm going to say it several times, but I would rewind it to the point that, think about the business problem, the challenge, what it is you're trying to do. And then you can look at where you're looking, what data you're looking at and what research methods you're using. But the thing I find interesting, I think the fact that social listening has taken off as such an industry and has so many practitioners and tools and suppliers that do it now is it's an easy thing to do, right? Like it's become almost an established behavior for marketers that's like, I need to find something out, and I know that we've got a subscription to a social listening tool, so I might just jump into that because it's easy and I can do it from my desk and I'll find some information. So yeah, I think trying to kind of disrupt people's behaviors around carrying out market research and going back to that point of what are you actually trying to understand.
Yeah, I think picking up on the financial services slant again, I did an amazing study about 2 years ago, and what you're saying there about people sharing memes and things, we could completely see that in social. But I think that it brings up a point in terms of being able to define what is social. So for me, social data, it's not just your big social media platforms like your Twitters and your Instagram and Facebook, and everyone's going to say you can't get much data from some of those. That's right. It's about all of these other channels as well. So we've got things like Reddit and Quora. We've got Tumblr is making a comeback as well, TikTok, and then you've got all the forums and the review sites and the blogs and things like that as well. And when you get into these special interest groups, they might be about, there was an AK-47 group, so it's old guys talking about their AK-47s, generally in America, but they talk about all manner of things, from diabetes through to everything else. And then you've got things like mums groups and things like that. And these people, because they're making these bonds with others, they talk about all manner of things. And when we went to do this project that was about how people consume loans and credit cards in the UK, there was times, because I read everything, I've tried to read as much as I can. There was times when I was nearly crying about some of the dire straits that people were going through. The outcome of that particular project was we made different customer personas, and we could see when people were going to be transient in between these different personas. And there was 3 personas in particular, and they displayed the same psychology as yo-yo dieters. They were living off of money, then something in the environment or themselves would acknowledge that. They would start paying it back, so they would start getting into this kind of diet, so to speak. And then they would get so far around and think, oh, I've been really, really good. And then they would go start to spend money again. And they were just perpetually going around in that cycle. And it's the same with dieting as well, it was absolutely fascinating. So it's not just sometimes that we'd want to do a bit of social listening. There's actually a lot more that can happen with the data.
Yes, that's a really good point, and thank you for flagging that. And I say the same with search as well. More and more people in the search industry talk about Amazon being, a #1 search engine in a very transactional commercial sense. But you can apply, when I talk about one of the best data sources that I use when I do my search listening work is the Google suggestions. So not even kind of keyword data from Google's AdWord planner, but literally just when you're typing something into Google, what is it going to start suggesting to you? Because those are effectively kind of trending searches, and that's the data that AnswerThePublic surfaces as well. It's just a massively sort of at scale and speeded up process. But those Google search suggestions are a really rich source of insight for me. But those suggestions are coming up as they are because of Google's algorithm and ability to understand at scale what people in your local area are searching at that moment in time. But it's, so many websites use that same sort of AI now. So Amazon will suggest the products that it's seeing that are most often searched for when you start typing that thing. So I think it's a really good point. And I think whether it's social or search, it's almost thinking of social and search as behaviours rather than channels. So people being social online, and they may be social on Reddit or in a forum that's specifically about their topic interests, and people will search in Google, but they will search in other channels as well. I think that's quite a nice way to think of it, isn't it?
Yeah, no, definitely, I'd agree.
Brilliant. Okay, so that was all really helpful. Thank you. I guess the next question is, we've sort of touched on this as well with some of the things that you guys have been talking about already. But yeah, I think it'd be really interesting if we could sort of explore the kind of how-to. So how would people use the data to kind of inform their work? So right at the start, when, before they're even thinking about the strategy, as well as to measure its effectiveness. So I think a lot of people are turning to kind of social and search to see how things are performing and what people are saying about their brands. But how should people be using that information to set things off right at the start? Perhaps even, it could be to even help them with developing a product, that's that kind of stage of the journey.
It's a good question. It reminds me of something I saw on LinkedIn this week, actually. Someone had posted that they felt, and I agree, that sometimes marketers or businesses are super keen to use customer insight to figure out how best to market their products, but perhaps not always enough or like adept enough at using the same methods to inform what they're actually doing and what their business might be and their products and their services, which might be a generalization, but I think it was a really interesting point, and for me highlights that you can use all of this data sort of across the whole journey. It's got so many uses, any kind of online data.
Yeah, no, I would agree. Sophie, do you want to bring up your maturity model there? Because I think that, going through that, and I think then I can explain a bit about the kind of maturity again in the social intelligence realm and how they link together. Sure.
So I should just flag for anyone who is looking at this. It's not very high quality, so apologies. It's a screen grab of a free download on searchlistening.com. So if you go onto searchlistening.com, it's available as a free download, as I said. But I put this together because, again, going back to search data, it feels like a lot of people, and I've put it as the beginner step, are great at using search data to plan their content. And we see with AnswerThePublic, a lot of people use it to just produce content, and that's great. But actually, there are much more sophisticated uses of search data, I think. So the basic level that I've put on here, it says you understand that search data evolves over time and you're making use of Google Trends to explore these evolutions. So another great tool that I always endorse when I talk search. The point there, I think, is a nudge for anyone who is using AnswerThePublic on this webinar, that you should remember that, and I guess this comes back to any sort of research you're doing, right? It's just a snapshot of that moment in time that you're looking at. So this needs to be, if you're trying to understand an audience really, really broadly, you want to be checking in on a regular basis, right? Because I probably think different things now than I did certainly this time last year, because, a pandemic hit. But consumer behavior changes all the time. So a more sophisticated use of search data, I think, is reflected in the fact that you're checking in on it as a regular source of data that you're looking at. The advanced stage, I'm aware there's a lot of text here and it's quite blurry. So this says, you recognise that search data is, in the words of Seth Stevens-Davidovitz, and if you've not read his book, Everybody Lies, that's one that I massively, massively recommend. It's the most important data set ever collected on the human psyche, and as such, so if you believe in that, you'd be regularly drawing your audience insights, not for strategic use, not just tactical execution, which is exactly what we talked about earlier. Yeah, and I would, if you're at an advanced level, then search listening is an established part of your kind of research toolkit, if you like, which I think a lot of people, I'm starting to meet more and more people who are on that journey, which is exciting for me. But then at the expert level, it says search intelligence is powering strategic decisions right across your business. Your teams are regularly doing search listening, and the insights taken are used to plan content, PR, advertising and marketing campaigns, but also to identify new product or service features and new audiences, to name new products and services, to forecast and to plan the future of the business. And I really do believe that this data has the potential for that. And I work with some really great people who are doing all of those things. So actually, I think I put this together with search listening in mind, but you can see the shift again from search listening to intelligence that I talk about on that slide. And I think, again, it probably echoes a lot of how Gillian thinks about this in terms of the evolution from using it at a beginner level to an expert level.
Yeah, no, I have to agree. And our model that we've made in terms of maturity is very similar to yours. We have an extra step in, which is, we call it activated, and this is where people are just getting to know the data. So we find that there's a lot of companies out there have bought a tool and it just sits there like an unused gift. It's not wanted because they just don't know how to get started. And we tend to see people at this point, maybe someone will come and say, we need to do a bit of listening, or we know we need to use this. We just don't know how to make value of it. And then probably where your beginner part is where our inward looking people are, which is where they're getting to understand themselves. So they're using it for campaign success, and they're using it to understand who's talking about their brand and what it is that they're saying. Whereas when we start to move in more, we've got these outward looking people who are starting, this is where the search, social listening starts to come in, and they're doing a bit more listening. They're starting to answer some questions and they're starting to find their feet a little bit, but they know that there's more that they could be doing with the data. Whereas when we move into the next two stages, which I would guess is round about where your expert stage is, because this is where we start to see people using search data more. The first one is make an impact, and this is where we would start to see that social intelligence is coming, and we're really looking to kind of look at the outcomes and how they fit into the larger business. Whereas the final one is integrated, and these are the guys that have the processes down and they're building the centralized teams, and there's a lot of buy-in across the organization, and they're starting to really see value from the data. And I would say it's probably those last two stages where people see the most value, whereas the rest is maybe slightly questionable, if I'm honest.
Yeah.
There's a question here actually that's really relevant, I think, to what you guys are just talking about and the actual sort of like process. So someone's asked if they were, you know, putting together a brief that was about kind of social intelligence and search listening, what sort of questions should they be asking in that brief? How would they go about that?
It's a very good question, and for us, it's going to completely depend upon what the outcome of what it is that they're hoping to achieve. I think that if it depends, and as well, it depends if you're going to be briefing internally or if you're going to be briefing an agency, because there's a lot of agencies that do this as well, and there's sometimes a little bit of disconnect in between what people think they're going to get and what they actually receive. I think being able to make sure that you're clear on what you hope to be able to, why you're doing the research, the question that you want to answer, and what you want to be able to use it for are extremely important. It's not just can we do a bit of social listening and see what happens? It's like we really need to know kind of the objectives and what you want to use the data for.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think what I would say is more a watch out than a try to do, but in terms of a watch out, yeah, don't be prescriptive with what it is. If the brief should be about the problem and the outcome that you want to get to, it shouldn't necessarily detail and here is the method that I want you to use to do it, right? It's we've got this problem, we want to do some research to figure it out, rather than use search listening to do this, unless you've, I guess, done the kind of initial stage of insight that says that is the right method to use, I suppose.
Great, cool. Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you for answering that question. That was absolutely brilliant. Thanks, guys. Lots of really brilliant insights there. We've had loads and loads of questions through, and we've got about 20 minutes. So we're going to try and get through as many as we can now. So
just worth me jumping in and saying, I saw in my chat as I was going through that, a few people sent messages privately to me. I've not got the ability to talk about this and read those at any detail, I'm afraid. So if you have sent a private question, I would say either tweet me it if you don't want it answered sort of publicly here, or put it in the public forum, and I will try and answer it.
To that point, actually, it's worth just mentioning quickly before we go into questions, there were quite a few people that I spotted that were asking about if Gillian, if you could share the link to the mortgages example that you were talking about earlier.
I don't think that one's in the public domain. That was something that was given to me that I was allowed to talk about. So I will go back and speak to the team to see if we can get that and send it across to you. But it might take a day or so, because I'm just waiting on coming back to me.
Yeah, cool. Okay, great. And then similarly, Sophie, people were asking about if you could share the slide that you had on a second ago. This one here, because I think it was a little bit fuzzy on some people's screens, but we will get together any resources and things like that we've spoken about on the webinar today and send those in the follow-up notes as well. Yeah. So cool. On to questions then. So first of all, I thought this one was really interesting. Is there any evidence which clearly links people's searches with what they truly care about, rather than simply what they're curious about?
Yes, definitely. I think I saw someone post some of it, but the book I mentioned, so Everybody Lies by Seth Stephens-Davidovitz, he did some really cool stuff in it. So I think he's now a data journalist for the New York Times. At least that's what he was last time I checked in. But he previously worked as a data scientist for Google, and that was fresh out of college in the US. And he got that gig because he did a research piece, which is covered in the book. It was ahead of the Obama election where Obama won. And he analysed search behaviour. I saw someone reference it in the chat, so hopefully everyone will have had a little pre-read of it. But he did a whole load of analysis of search behaviour around who was going to win, and was able to better predict the outcome of the election in various states than the polls were, and it actually translated into real life. So it's a fair question and a fair point. A lot of search behaviour is informational. You know, I will always admit that, you know, it could be, I guess not in this day and age, it could be that someone is down the pub having a conversation with their mate, and someone says something and someone doesn't believe it's true, and so you turn to Google to verify those facts. Or yeah, you are just at home trying to do something and you turn to Google. But I also see people type statements into Google. So I've worked on campaigns for a travel brand. It was like a ski and snowboard campaign, and people would type in things like skiers are douchebags, right? So for me, that's fascinating that people type in opinions. And I think the behavior behind it is that they're trying to find a community of like-minded people who share that opinion, and they know that search might get, in fact, like, again, going back to what we talked about earlier, it could be that they're looking for those forums that they can find the other snowboarders or skiers who share the opinion the same as them, and they know that Google will get them there, and so they type their opinion into Google. So yes, a lot of searches are informational or purchase driven, but I wouldn't disregard the fact that people reveal a lot about themselves within how they interact with Google.
Yeah, I have to agree. We had an example that was given to us. Now, I can't remember if it was in the Everybody Lies book, and I've tried to search Google numerous times, and I cannot find the link to it. So, but it was something that was given to me a number of years ago, and it was looking at the difference between how people search and how people talk in social media, and in the search, and that this was all it was. within what they were looking at refugees and how people talk about refugees online, but what they actually search for in search for in Google, and it was completely different because everybody was all empathetic in social media, but when it came to the search, the biggest things were, what do I do if a refugee moves to the house beside me, and things like that. It was quite enlightening, actually.
It's like the public face versus the private thoughts, isn't it? And what you want associated with you publicly versus what you want to find out about privately.
Yeah.
I can see someone in the chat's just said, so Google says 80% of searches are informational, 10% overtly transactional, and 10% the informational 80% for me is interesting there. I think you can probably, well, I would definitely say that informational is a very broad term in that sense, and I think you can probably chop that up into a lot of different behaviours. I talk about kind of validation of feelings and all sorts of other behaviours that I think go into informational.
Great, thanks for that, guys. I guess this one's probably a question for you, actually, Sophie. So do you see different search engines delivering different results in search listening? As in, do people use search engines in different ways?
That's a very good question. And the answer is partly I don't know, because I tend to focus on Google because it's by far the kind of market leader in the UK in terms of the search engines that people use. So for breadth of sample and what I'm looking at, I tend to focus on Google. What I would say is I know that with Bing, if you look at the demographics of it, I'm sure Bing has a slightly older demographic sometimes. I think a lot of people think it's kind of swayed by the fact that a lot of laptops, Microsoft laptops, kind of come with Bing as the preferred search engine, and people aren't sure how to set Google as their preferred one. So you may see some differences playing out there. I'm not sure. It's not something I've investigated massively, but it's a very interesting question.
Great, thank you. Okay, so one here, this one would be for Gillian. So could you please provide some more detail? Oh no, sorry, hang on, this one. So can you recommend a list of social listening tools in different price ranges? Because some of them are very expensive.
Yeah, some of them are very expensive, and some of the smaller players have been eaten up by the larger ones, or unfortunately they've gone out of business because the cost of social data is increasing all of the time. We do keep an extensive list on the Social Intelligence Lab under Search Directory, and it's a directory of all of the different platforms in which we know. And some of them we work directly with. So if you search in there, you'll be able to find loads, and you can search on price as well. So all of that is in there.
Sorry about that. I just got a notification to say my laptop battery was about to die.
Oh no!
It's going to be okay. Cool. Okay, so there's quite a long question here, but I think it's a really good one. So someone said, sorry about the long question, but it seems to be top of mind. Some of our clients have siloed their channel data within different internal departments. Website data is controlled by one department, another holds onto social data tightly, etc. Clearly, their challenge is understanding the customer journey, let alone what people are actually seeking when they start into the funnel. Our challenge is getting them to see they need to combine all of their data for a full understanding of what's happening now and planning for the future. Do any on the panel have recommendations on best practices to get clients to see how unsiloing listening data will help them create a blended understanding of their customer and their journey?
That is an amazing question.
I was going to say, what a question.
And yeah, and you're not the only person going through this problem either. I have a small community, a small Slack community for people who work within social intelligence. And what we're finding is that there's a lot more businesses are starting to take on this challenge and create more centralized units with all sorts of different data sources coming in there for people to be able to access on self-service if they can do that themselves, or then request to a central team that they can actually begin to go and answer the questions for them. So there's like an internal brief that comes through. It seems to be, it's an extraordinarily difficult process, and it takes a very, very long time. I think that and this is a really strange answer, but the people who seem to be further along the journey are the businesses that have had some kind of crisis issue, and they've had to resort to lots of different data sources in terms of being able to manage that crisis. So then they start to put more money into it. But the question is, how we don't want a crisis, because at that point it's too late. We should have done it ages ago. So how do we get people to do that beforehand? And the way that we've been seeing it is being able to connect these different businesses up at different stages of that journey so they can help each other work through it, because they've had to answer all of these questions and go through all of these challenges before. And that's the way that we've found that it seems to be working for the people that we talk to just now.
I would just add to that from my part of the puzzle, I suppose, search, I feel like I see a lot of businesses where search data is owned by the search department, right, as in the search marketing team. And I think it's a bigger industry shift and a conversation that I'm trying to initiate with people I know in search, which is that, yes, they're the kind of gatekeepers of that data, but they should be sharing it with the whole business. It's not just an input for search marketing. It should be being used more broadly. But yeah, it's definitely a challenge to to get it out of the search teams.
Great, thanks guys. Okay, so one here, does search listening work for trends over time? Do Google search suggestions only give this current snapshot of trends? So how do you kind of monitor those changes over time?
Well, that's a very good question. Yes, absolutely. They change all the time. So the examples that, so I, at the start of lockdown in the UK, started doing I started tracking Google search suggestions around the phrase, should I? And I was tracking them on a daily basis. Again, it's on search listening. There's a visualization of it, but you saw, so when the house market crashed, you suddenly saw people searching, should I sell my house? When I say people searching it, it became a more prominent suggestion by Google because they'd seen people searching it. When I think the stock markets crashed, it was, should I sell my shares? Should I buy stocks? All these sorts of things. And so any sort of new thing that broke, any new development that was affecting sort of the nation was reflected in those should I. So it was always should I, the sort of search seed that I was looking at, but it was what suggestion came after, sorry. And it was totally affected and influenced by the kind of bigger political, financial events that were going on. So yes, they change on a daily basis, if not hourly, because a news story breaks and people's search behaviour changes. In terms of monitoring it, the nice thing with AnswerThePublic is that if every time you do a search in there, it's scraping those search suggestions and it saves them in your account. So you can always go back and then you can start comparing over time and seeing how the suggestions have changed. Otherwise, you can just do it manually if you have the inclination to capture what it is that Google is suggesting. AnswerThePublic has also now for pro users got actual alerts. So if it's a term that you're particularly interested in, so I've got one set up for Trump at the moment. So I think on a weekly basis, I'm seeing how search suggestions around Trump, just the term Trump, are changing week on week. So yeah, absolutely, you want to be checking on it all the time, but and they do change. So yeah, keep looking at them.
I guess that's a sort of similarly interesting question for you, Gillian, as well too, because obviously you've got a similar problem with sort of social. There's so much data and it's changing constantly. Like, how would people kind of keep track of those changes when it comes to social?
I think you constantly, so there's a couple of different things that you need to be aware of. Is when you go in to make that initial search, you've got to write your search query, but you've got to constantly keep on going back in and refining that, because people write in different ways. Something else happens, and sometimes there's new words and phrases that become really popular within a group of people. So you need to constantly monitor that and go back in and change it. And then even within the data that's being pulled through, when you've got all of these sub queries set up, so to help you segment and analyze the data, you constantly need to be finding the data that's not filtering into any of these smaller buckets and going to work out why they're not there. I have to say that when you're going in to do that, the ones that don't tend to filter into the buckets are the ones that's the special. That's where the magic of social data is, because they're the ones that you've never thought to look to look at before, and you tend to find a lot better answers to questions, or something that's completely left field that no one's thought of. So it's not just, there's a bit that unknown with social data as well, and you need to, that's a bit where the magic is, if I'm honest.
Great, that's really helpful, thank you. So there's someone that has asked if we're planning a search listening webinar for those particularly interested in performing advanced keyword searches. I would direct you for that question to our YouTube channel. Mentioned this earlier, but it's youtube.com/AnswerThePublic. The very first webinar that we did, I think it's called Search Listening, How to Read People's Minds and Make Better Business Decisions. That was just with Sophie, and she did go through lots of different kind of tips and hacks in that webinar, which you'd probably find really helpful. And also there is a video which is how to use Answer the Public. It's kind of the overall ultimate guide of using Answer the Public, and Sophie features in that as well, and you'd get lots of different kind of tips and hacks in that one too. So definitely check those out, and if we do plan another session on anything like that, as you've registered for this webinar, you'll hear about it in the future. So another question here. So somebody here would like to know your views on the concept of share of search as a leading indicator of market share. Perhaps Sophie, you've got some thoughts on that one.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I know there's been a few sort of articles written about it quite recently in the marketing press. I like it. I think I might be biased because I work at a search marketing agency. It's a metric that we've looked at for a while. So yeah. And I think the studies have shown that it does very closely mirror actual sort of market performance. So yeah, I'm all for it, and I'm really pleased that people are starting to talk about it, because I think it's, again, bringing the potential of search data as something more than an input for search marketing, actually as a driver of kind of business performance and a measurement of business performance to the table. So yeah, happy that these conversations are happening.
Cool, great. I think we've got time for about one or two more questions. So if you have got a question that we haven't answered yet, please do get it in. We've kind of touched on this, but it would be good to just answer this one. So has Answer the Public or any of today's presenters attempted to tie in data from the Answer the Public tool to the marketing funnel and or the customer journey? Yeah.
So I mean, at a very, very basic level, one of the tips that I often give people is, so I guess you tailor the results that you get out of Answer the Public by the term that you put in, and so much of that comes down to the semantics that you're using. Again, we talked about it earlier in terms of making sure you're speaking like your audience might be. One of the biggest tips that I give people is if you can directly compare an audience of prospects potentially, although that would include kind of just more informational seekers, to your customers or people who own your product by using the word my. So an example is you might put iPhone into Answer the Public and you will get lots of informational queries about an iPhone, people searching things like iPhone versus Samsung versus whatever. If you put my iPhone in, you're suddenly opening up a wealth of insight that's how people who own the iPhone are searching. So the word my is really, really useful in that. And obviously I'm aware that there is a much the kind of customer funnel or journey, whatever you want to call it, is a lot more detailed than that. But that's one of the simplest, easiest, most interesting ways to kind of differentiate insights, to look at potentially customers versus prospects. And it just comes down to using my. That's an interesting one for me. But yes, I think there's so much potential to look at it further up the customer journey as well. But it's about figuring out the semantics that you can use to get some sort of indication that someone is at a certain stage in the customer journey.
Yeah, I think I've never done it myself before because I've kind of moved out of the data analysis part of my job. But the agencies and the people that we work with, they certainly are using search within the customer journey, and then using social to then dive a bit deeper into how people are talking at that particular moment in time as well. So yeah, there's lots of scope for that.
Great, thanks, guys. Gillian, this one might be one for you. So have you used a combination of search and social listening to develop a digital persona?
Yes. In the finance industry one that I mentioned before, we used a combination of both of those within that. The search helped us start off some of the, like, being able to write the queries, and then also be able to identify where people were going and what sites they were landing on, things like that through the journey. When this was specifically people who were buying credit cards and loans, or are looking to get a credit card or a loan. It's very, very useful. The personas that I make are not necessarily the same as the personas that you can download persona templates online and things like that. I get more into the psychology about how people are thinking and feeling at that particular moment in time. So we tend to make them up based upon these behaviours rather than things like demographics and things like that. Or the media that they consume. That's always a big one as well within some of these. And their interest, for me, it's about that particular journey that they're moving on and the headspace that they're in when they're trying to make it. But we definitely do that.
Great, thank you. Cool. We're slightly over, so I think we're going to have to call it a day now. But thank you, everyone that's here, for sending in your questions. There's some really, really good ones there. As we mentioned earlier, you can always get us on social media if you did have a question or anything that you wanted to talk about. I'll send all of our handles in the follow-up notes, and you will get any of the references and the slides and things like that that we've been through today. So I hope everyone enjoyed the session. I know I found it absolutely fascinating. I will definitely be watching it back again as a spectator and taking lots of Gillian and Sophie's tips. They're absolutely brilliant. And yeah, so grateful to you guys for being here today. Really appreciate it.
No, thank you very much for having me, and for everyone for all the great questions. They were really good.
Thanks so much, guys. And yeah, just for everyone that's in the room, mentioned this, but we will be sending round a recording of this session, and it also will go onto our YouTube channel. That will probably be sometime next week, but you'll get the notes before then too. So that's youtube.com/AnswerThePublic. And we do run these sessions regularly. So we haven't got the next one scheduled in yet, but it probably will be in November sometime. But as you guys have all registered, you'll get information about that one as soon as we've got it all sorted. But yeah, massive thank you again to Gillian and Sophie for being here today. It's a brilliant session, and yeah, look forward to chatting to you again soon.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks so much, everyone. See you again.